It's officially spooky season, so I thought this would be the perfect time to look into a spooky-themed doll line. And no, I'm not talking about Monster High. Although the fact that they were probably the first thing that came to your mind is exactly why the subject of today's video was created. I am, of course, talking about Bratzillaz, a doll line from MGA that was so heavily marketed and yet so short-lived that it's honestly scary. Hi, I'm Sasha, and I like to take deep dives into childhood media in order to escape the horrors of adulthood. Despite its clear association with one of the biggest doll lines of all time, Bratz, and the apparently large budget it was given by MGA, Bratzillaz was a flash-in-the-pan doll line that was a separate entity from the actual Bratz franchise. Today, I'm digging into what exactly Bratzillaz was, how it came to be, and why it disappeared. Now, for some background before I discuss the dolls themselves. The year was 2012, and MGA, the company responsible for Bratz dolls, had been struggling. A decade prior, Bratz was the top-selling doll line and was basically responsible for declining sales of Barbie dolls created by their biggest competitor, Mattel, for several years. That is until around 2009, when MGA halted the production of new Bratz dolls as the result of an ongoing legal battle between the two companies that ruined my childhood. That's not the focus for right now, but it's important to note because, naturally, pausing the production of your most popular doll line is going to hurt its popularity. And it was during this hiatus that Mattel launched Monster High, which would quickly become the second best-selling doll line after the company's staple Barbie doll. MGA attempted to do a sort of soft rebrand in 2010 with the 10th anniversary Bratz dolls, which involved a new art style and a new style of makeup for the dolls. But they would unfortunately struggle to reach the same heights they had prior. Bratz were no longer the titans of the doll industry that they once were, and their biggest competitor was dominating the top two spots. So MJ followed the sage-old advice and said, if you can't beat them, try to copy their homework. And as a result, Bratzillaz hit the scene in the summer of 2012. A very interesting time of year to debut a witch-themed doll line, but I guess it makes sense if 1, you're trying to gain traction before Halloween, and 2, you're trying to establish this as a year-round doll line and not just a one-off Halloween line. And it's important to note that Bratzillaz was a separate entity from Bratz, despite the obvious similarities. Separate trademark, separate website, separate lore. Kind of like a spin-off doll line, if you will. Which was also an interesting choice because they easily could have made a witch-themed Bratz collection and even had a movie or mini-series to go with it. After all, thanks to movies like Bratz Genie Magic and Bratz Fashion Pixies, we know magic exists in the Bratz universe. But by establishing Bratzillaz as its own entity, MGA made it clear that the goal was to have multiple releases for this brand, and they didn't want to worry about how it may affect the main Bratz line. The core Bratzillaz were introduced as the witch cousins of the main Bratz girls. This core line included Cloetta, Megana, Yasmina, Sasha Bella, and Jade. Which I keep laughing at because, for whatever reason, they decided that in order to be a witch, your name needs to end in the letter A. And so they made up all these names that either aren't real or are super uncommon. And the name Jada was right there, and they said, nope, absolutely not. You'd think if they were going to leave any name as it is, it'd be Sasha, which already ends in an A, but nope. Based on this alleged piece of concept art, Jade's name was originally supposed to be Jadora, which is really pretty, and I'm mad they didn't keep that. And it would make a lot more sense with the whole letter A at the end of your name rule. No idea why they changed it. Anyways, these 5 girls were obviously supposed to be related to Chloe, Megan, Yasmin, Sasha, and Jade. The characters in this doll line were all witches who each had a unique power. Cloetta had the power of transformation, Megana could fly, Yasmina could see into the future, Sasha Bella could talk to animals, and Jade could heal broken hearts. The dolls had inset glass eyes and fully articulated arms and legs, 2 features that the regular Bratz dolls did not have, and 2 features that are definitely more expensive to produce, indicating that MGA was investing a decent amount in this doll line in the hopes of it being a success. The dolls also had tattoos called witch marks, which were unique to each character and reflected their power. I personally thought the Bratzillaz designs were super cute, but my favorite feature was definitely the glass eyes. Prior to this, I'd only really seen glass eyes be used in baby dolls, and I'd never even thought it would be possible to see this in a fashion doll. I especially loved it because they went beyond regular glass eyes, as most of the characters had something unique about their eyes. Sasha Bella had a cat's eye shape, and Jade had heart-shaped pupils. It was very Bruno Bollet for my fellow Nancy Drew fans. The first line of dolls also came with character cards, similar to the original Bratz dolls back in the day. But with these ones, a digital character video would appear when it was held up to a webcam. I tried to find more info about this, but all I could find was the augmented reality game called Bratzillaz Enchanted Adventure, which sounded more complex than what the initial description I found was, but I think it might be the same thing. If you had the original doll line and you know the game is what the cards initially gave you access to, or if it came out later as an additional feature, please let me know. When the Bratzillaz debuted, they did so with an absolute banger of a theme song that still pops into my head from time to time. I was absolutely living for the dancers in the music video. They were serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The video was filmed at a historic mansion in California that went on sale a few years ago for a mere $40 million. So again, MGA was definitely putting money into this. This theme song was used in an online animated series that would soon follow. The Bratzillaz web series was well done, although short-lived. It followed the girls from the very beginning of their journey at Bratzillaz Academy, the school for witches. Each episode was about 3 minutes long. I liked the series overall, but I think the highlight was definitely the first 3 episodes because they served as a very solid introduction to the characters and the world they live in. What was interesting to me, though, was the fact that the series used a completely different animation style from the box art. But in my opinion, the animation used in the show looks more similar to the dolls than the box art does. The series only had 9 episodes, which premiered on a bi-weekly basis from August to December of 2012. There was a 10th episode called Fashion Bites that never officially premiered on the Bratzillaz YouTube channel, but you can watch it through the Bratzillaz compilation videos on the main Bratz YouTube channel. A clip from this episode appears in a footage montage at the end of the 9th episode when Yasmina looks into the future. There's some footage from earlier in the season during this montage as well, but since we would eventually see the 10th episode be released, it's reasonable to assume that the new footage in this segment would have been from future episodes. It's a shame they never released these episodes since they appear to have already been made. In 2013, Bratzillaz released a 5-part weekly video series called Witchy Princesses Adventure, which was created to introduce the upcoming Witchy Princesses line. Although I use the term video series loosely because the videos were just a bunch of stills alternating between storybook pages and images that were created using the box art for the dolls. Honestly, it looks fan-made. I actually thought it was fan-made until I realized it was in fact on the official Bratzillaz YouTube channel. It feels kind of like an initial draft of a storyboard for what I presume would have been the start of the 2nd season of the web series that never got made. And since we would later find out that Witchy Princesses would be the final release of this doll line, I'm guessing that's exactly what happened. Okay, so if you, like me, were a fan of Monster High at the same time Bratzillaz came out, then you probably already spotted a lot of similarities between the two brands just from the info I've gone over so far, assuming you didn't clock it during the initial run. I wanted to do an overview of the Bratzillaz line as a whole before doing a comprehensive look at all the similarities at once. To be completely honest, as a kid, I did not make the connection that Bratzillaz was more or less an alleged ripoff of Monster High. Full disclosure, Bratz has always been my #1 favorite toy line, so it was hard for me as a kid to believe they were capable of doing anything wrong or being anything less than the best. But as an adult, I feel insane for not seeing all the very obvious similarities. I will blame it on youthful ignorance. But honestly, as a kid, I was just excited to have more dolls and more content, so if I did notice, I did not care. So of course, there is the very obvious comparison to be made about the concepts of the two lines. Monster High is about the children of legendary monsters attending the same high school. And because they all have different backgrounds, they all have different abilities, or freaky flaws that make them unique. Bratzillaz is centered around witches who attend an academy for witches, and each witch has a special witch talent that is unique to them. However, they would introduce a few characters who looked very monster-like. For example, the character Vampalina, if you couldn't guess from her name, looked a lot like a vampire. And she even had a pet bat, just like Monster High's resident vampire Draculaura. But canonically, she is just a witch, and her special power is the ability to see in the dark. Now, just the concept alone might raise some eyebrows, but isn't necessarily enough to claim one was copying the other. After all, after the success of Monster High, several toy lines came out with the concept of a themed high school. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. The Glam Gets Wicked music video was no doubt inspired by the popularity of the Monster High Fright song, which, aside from being a bop, had a similar roll call style introduction to the core line of characters during one of the verses of the song. The video also introduced the Bratzillaz tagline, "Glam gets wicked," not to be confused with Monster High's "Freaky just got fabulous." Part of the concept for the Bratzillaz universe was that each student had a unique pet that they were bonded to. They don't refer to them as familiars in the series, but I'm guessing the idea was supposed to be a reference to a witch's familiar, which was a witch's supernatural animal companion. Toy versions of these pets came out with one of the versions of the initial core line of dolls, and they could also be bought separately as individual toys. The Monster High characters also had their own pets from the inception of the series. To MGA's credit, the pets played a much more involved role in the Bratzillaz series than the pets do in the Monster High universe. In fact, the pets barely made any appearances in the Monster High web series and movies, but appeared in almost every episode of the Bratzillaz series. Now, so far, all of the comparisons I've mentioned have been from the initial introduction of Bratzillaz, which I think is fairly forgivable to an extent. It wouldn't be the first time that a company has heavily borrowed a concept from another brand. And I'm not just talking toys. For example, Marvel debuted the Avengers in 1963, which was 3 years after DC had created the Justice League. And when this type of thing happens, it's very easy to point out the similarities between properties in the beginning. But once the alleged copycat has enough time to establish its own identity, it's usually able to grow in a way that distinguishes itself from the supposed source material. And I wish, oh how I wish I could say that was the case here and that the similarities end on the conceptual level. But in 2013, Bratzillaz released the Witch collection, which could not have been a more obvious remake of Monster High's Create a Monster line if it tried. In case you aren't familiar with either, the concept for these toy lines was to allow the player to create their own monster, or in this case witch, by using a set of body parts that came in starter and expansion packs. Wait, that description sounds really morbid. By body parts, I mean doll components. Like individual hands, heads, torsos, etc. could be combined any number of ways to create your own unique doll, as opposed to a pre-assembled one. The Create a Monster version came out 2 years before the Switch-A-Witch line did, and the Switch-A-Witch packaging placed an emphasis on the fact that its starter set came with 2 doll torsos. This seems like a pretty mundane detail to focus on, right? But as always, there's more to it than that. Because when Create a Monster first launched, the starter packs came with all of the body parts for 2 dolls, except it only had 1 torso. And the expansion packs didn't come with torsos either, meaning the only way to create more than 1 doll at a time would be to buy multiple starter packs. And even then, you'd still be left with a bunch of components lying around because of the disproportionate number of torsos. Whether it was an oversight or an attempt at forcing people to buy multiple starter packs, Mattel was understandably criticized for this decision. And so they remedied this by releasing future starter packs with 2 torsos moving forward. And all of that had been resolved by the end of 2012, before any Switch-A-Witch packs came out. So MGA emphasizing this on their packaging could have been done to simply appeal to people who took issue with the initial release of Create a Monster, but in my opinion, it just feels like they were throwing some shade at their rival. Which is especially funny because the Switch-A-Witch dolls also had a very obvious oversight of their own. They came with different body types. In a normal doll release, this would be really cool, to see a doll collection that embraces different body shapes and sizes. But when the components are supposed to be interchangeable, it results in lopsided dolls. The first starter pack was created from 2 dolls with different body shapes and heights. Meaning if you put 2 different legs on your doll, she would have no choice but to either stand on the tall leg or bend it so she can stand on the short one. Many people assumed this was just poor planning on MGA's part, but I theorize it actually goes deeper than that. You see, the main characters of Monster High all had different heights in the web series from the very beginning. However, this variation in body type was not reflected in the dolls, which all used the same body mold. This would change later in the series, but I'm talking about the core line of characters in 2013. So, my theory is that someone at MGA took note of this and saw an opportunity to get a leg up on their competition by being the first ones to have dolls of different heights. And so, I think the Switch-A-Witch body molds were probably based on some prototypes of body molds for future Bratzillaz dolls. Unfortunately, I will never be able to confirm this.
Cookie! Crispy! Katie! Cookie!
As I mentioned earlier, the Witchy Princesses line would be the last release from Bratzillaz, and the end of the Bratzillaz did seem to happen rather abruptly. Earlier that same year, Bratzillaz had rebranded to House of Witches. I'm guessing this was done in an effort to further distinguish itself from the regular Bratz doll line, which had undergone yet another soft rebrand. This time, it involved another new art style on the boxes, a new and less distinctive logo, and most notably, new doll molds. It was now standard for regular Bratz dolls to have fully articulated arms, and they were stretched out to be taller, resulting in them having rather gaunt-looking legs. And this was a fact they wanted you to know about because it was highlighted on the packaging for nearly every doll they released that year. It was no doubt done to mimic the body molds of the persistently popular Monster High dolls, which were skinnier and fully articulated. And this was a weird choice because if the whole purpose of Bratzillaz was to compete with Monster High, why would you make changes to the core doll line instead of testing it out on the Bratzillaz first? Although I guess the short answer is because they decided to stop making Bratzillaz. Thanks to a leaked promotional video, we can safely conclude that 2013 was originally supposed to go quite differently for the Bratzillaz. In the video, the voiceover discusses meeting the new students at the Bratzillaz Academy, while Bratzillaz 2013 is displayed on the screen. Then, a bunch of student IDs are shown on screen, introducing the new dolls in this collection. The IDs display the student names and special abilities, followed by detailed looks at the dolls themselves. No one knows why this release got scrapped, but the existence of this video proves that the doll designs, names, and concepts had all been approved, and the dolls themselves were most likely ready for production. I will note that some of the characters in the promo take after Vampalina and Fiona Finns by looking more like monsters than witches. One character had multiple arms like a spider, one looked similar to a zombie, and another had a very obvious resemblance to the Monster High character Scalita Calaveras. My best guess at the reason for the cancellation of this release would be that someone at MGA pointed out they were veering a little too far into Monster High territory and needed to stick more closely to the witch concept. One of the doll designs from this video, for the character Cassandra Von Bird, was used in the Witchy Princess's release instead. Her design was slightly altered, and her name was changed to Angelica Sound. And it's obvious the designs for the other two characters in that release were based on her as well. So yeah, my guess is that this was done to solidify their branding a bit more, but it also could have been MGA getting ready to pull the plug on the doll line. Or both. And while the fate of Bratzillaz was uncertain, it would be cheaper and easier to mass produce 3 nearly identical dolls than 6 completely different ones. Okay, so you remember the lawsuit that I mentioned at the start of this video? Yeah, the impact from that situation is not over yet. In case you couldn't tell from the multiple rebrand attempts, MGA was having some sort of identity crisis with the Bratz. And in 2015, they would decide to go full force with a much more intense, full reboot.
Ew!
But first, the team decided they needed some time to figure out what this entailed and let their ideas cook a bit. And so, in 2014, MGA announced that Bratz were taking an official hiatus, and Bratzillaz was unfortunately dragged along with them. Production of the dolls and web series just stopped after the summer of 2013 until the website was eventually taken down in 2016. But thanks to the amazing archive that is Lookin' Bratz, we know that they continued to release House of Witches chocolate eggs and Easter egg charms in 2014 and 2015. Because if there's one thing we all associate witches with, it's Easter. I plan to cover that Bratz 2015 reboot in a future video, but long story short, MGA would definitely regret that choice. And I know I keep saying this, but what a weird decision to cancel Bratzillaz alongside Bratz. The beauty of a spin-off is that after its initial creation and introduction, it's generally no longer dependent on the source material it was based on. So if Bratz ceased to exist, Bratzillaz could have continued on as a separate brand. And since the 2015 Bratz reboot was aimed at a younger audience, it would have made even more sense to keep the Bratzillaz line going to appeal to an older audience. Aside from the slightly more mature look and concept, the Bratzillaz ironically looked more like the original Bratz dolls than Bratz dolls had in years. So, in my opinion, doll collectors and fans of the original Bratz would have been more likely to purchase Bratzillaz than they would any of these rebrands and reboots. But hey, what do I know? I just work in marketing. So, there is your comprehensive overview of the Bratzillaz saga. As I was doing research for this video, Bratz Official just happened to post this poll on their Instagram story, so it's possible Bratzillaz may come back from the dead after all. I swear to you, I started writing the script for this video before they posted this, so perhaps I'm the real Yasmina Clairvoya. I'd love if they brought Bratzillaz back, even if it's just for a limited release, and I'm sure a lot of other people feel the same. If they bring them back full force, it'd be nice to see the release of those 5 other canceled dolls from 2013. But I personally preferred their original aesthetic, so I'd like to see them continue to make new witch characters with more subtle differences that don't toe the line of monster creature as much. But what are your thoughts? Were you a fan of the original Bratzillaz dolls? Were you aware of all the similarities between them and Monster High? Would you like to see them make a comeback? Let me know! If you liked this video, go ahead and subscribe for more childhood deep dives, and I will hopefully see you in the next one.